On this episode, two personalities. Hey everybody, this is The Quarter Show. And today I was talking to Ben. In fact, we had a nice conversation, and I recognized something that I had not put my finger on, I guess before at all. I never really thought about it too much, and we had a conversation while we were speaking. It made me realize that there are different beingnesses within selling. Okay, so when you think about beingnesses for a second, just you can call it personalities. You can apply it in life, right? Obviously, you have a different role, if you will, for a police officer, or for a judge, or or for a baker, or for this, or for that.
I don't talk to my wife the same way I talk to you.
Sure, exactly. Great. These are different personas, if you will, different personas. And when you look at selling, I never really realized this until today, but for me, I break it up. I look at the sales cycle. I look at a certain persona for even starting a cycle, frankly, even like prospecting and starting a cycle. There's like a persona there to start and ignite a cycle and get something going. But the thing I want to hone in on is the two personas of selling and closing. And, I look at each one as sort of its own cycle, right? So when you're selling, you take it from the beginning to a certain point. You take it to a certain point where you're selling, and you've essentially sold, and you've arrived at a certain point where closing starts to take place, right? And the selling personality or persona, it's done. You're done. You've done your job. You've sold, and you've done your job, and everything's wrapped up, and then you sort of transition over to the closer, and if you continue with the selling personality, the sort of PR and sort of selling personality all the way through, you can get closes, obviously, but it's trickier, and it's going to take longer, and there's going to be more effort, and there's going to be more hoops, and there's going to be all these different things. You have to almost shift gears, right? You have to end off on the selling personality or persona, and from there, the closing personality, the closing persona needs to take place, the closing beingness, and that's its own cycle. It's starting closing and completing closing, okay? And whenever, I sometimes I do a lot of different coming in and being the closer here at our agency, and for me it's always a bit of a shift in personality. If I'm selling, it's one way, and if I'm closing, it's another. And it isn't to say that you're like, schizophrenic or completely changing yourself. It's just that there's a bit of a shift in viewpoint, there's a bit of shift in operating basis, there's a bit of a shift in attitude, there's a bit of a shift in how you go about things, and it actually makes all the difference in the world. And so you have to recognize the two and be able to end off on one and start and pick up the other. And it doesn't mean you like all of a sudden you're a different person when you get on the phone, but there is elements of closing that, things that you do that make it conducive to closing, right? And
well, for example, right?
Yeah.
And it does make all the difference in the world, like he says. It's an important distinction. So think about some of this kind of stuff, right? So when you're selling, you're very often like, encouraging, and here are the values and the different things, and you are genuinely excited to help. And it is going to help, and you maybe put some mild pressure on some different things and be like, we really ought to do this, etc. And you're working that over. And then when you go into the closing area, right, this is where the selling, if it's done, right, that's actually complete. Mm-hmm. The person or the prospect, they're like, yes, good. So now you're entering an area where often that an individual, or maybe even then you have to include other people, maybe a CFO, maybe a CEO, different people have to be included, and they have to all be moved. You might already be dealing with the CEO, you might already be dealing with the person who's in power or important. But now motion has to take place. Something in the physical universe has to occur now. We've been talking and we have ideas. Now, like Rob points out, right, weights don't lift themselves. They don't lift themselves. Contracts don't get signed just because we talked about it. So you're at a point where you're saying we're going to commit, right? You're proposing with the diamond ring, and the gal has to take it, right, and say and like commit, right? This is a commitment. So it takes, you got to actually get, you have to get physical things moved, and that's why it's different, because it's harder than it sounds. It's very easy to sign a piece of paper. It's very easy to sign off electronically, but to get the person to do that action, there's almost always reasons that come to mind that say, no problem, Ben, I'll sign it off tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and this is where the closer persona or the closer personality, it's a higher control personality. It's a higher confront personality. It's a more efficient personality. It's a more direct personality. It's a more transparent and candid personality than the selling. So, for example, in selling, you're cordial, your customer service game's on, you're taking them all the way through, you're pleasant, you're handling the whole thing. You're being yourself, of course. The whole thing is authentic to you. You have to do you and be yourself and all that different stuff. But you walk them through, you educate, you handle, and everything's cordial and all that kind of stuff. Now, when you've done your selling, and it's like, yeah, they're going to do something, and they have the contract, and they're looking at that, you have to switch gears, and this is where the closing personality, the closing persona comes in, and there's an element of like the control has to be much higher, the confront has to be much higher, the questioning has to be much higher in terms of like getting down to the nitty gritty, and the sort of ability to hit people between the eyes and ask very, very sort of pointed or direct questions. You don't have to ruffle people's feathers. I'm not saying that. I'm saying your ability to control, and like Ben said, circle it in, and make something happen and get a physical item done, signed, sealed, closed, the right people on board, the right things to happen in terms of the logistics and sort of manipulating the stars to align. That's what I'm talking about with the closing persona. And like Ben said, it's easier said than done. But I think the point of this show is mainly just to point out and for you to look at for yourself. And obviously you're not going to do it my way, you're not going to do it Ben's way. For you to look at yourself is what are your two personas? What is your selling persona? And what is your closing persona? And when you separate the two, you can look at that little shift that needs to take place to sort of start the closing personality and move it into closing and complete that cycle, and understand and acknowledge that the selling persona, the selling part is done. At a certain point, the selling persona is done, and you're going to start, the other persona to move towards getting it done. And if you do that, you'll find that you're going to shorten the runway, you're going to shorten the time it takes, and you're going to increase the probability of actually happening. Whereas I've seen it many times, it's like if you keep doing the selling thing, if you keep that same thing, you don't ask the right questions, you don't confront the things that need to be confronted.
Yeah, because look,
you don't push through the awkwardness. It takes too long. It drags out. It doesn't get done. Sometimes it gets missed. It's almost like the selling persona is not up to the task of what needs to happen in the closing stage.
It's a different set of objections and things that come up. That's why, like when we were talking, we went through it a lot today. In selling, you know your product, and you know the things that get said, the questions that get asked, and the objections that come up. It's a whole different set of things in the closing side, so you've got to be prepared. He drilled me a whole bunch on different things to say and how to put it, and no, that's not quite good enough because you're still doing da-da-da-da. You need to, right in the closing section, what you're doing is they're going to have different things that they're going to say. If you need to know, this is getting down to some brass tacks. We won't spend a lot of time, but okay, good. Yeah, we're all good here. I'll, we'll get this signed off and back over to you. Great. Who's going to sign? Who's going to sign? Oh, this person. Great. Are you going to send it over to them now? Yes. Good. And then you have to I'm going to call them. I'm going to reach out myself, etc. You have to it's not product related anymore because that's done. Now it's a whole new set of things. That's why it's useful.
Yeah, and the closing persona, like Ben's described, is like it's coming in and it's framing the conversation. It's boxing in the conversation. It's controlling the outcome of the conversation. Whereas in selling, with the selling persona, you may or may not do that as much, right? You may be just like you're having nice conversations, you have a nice discovery, you're cordially taking them to proposal review, you're doing all these different things. It's a little bit more lighter. It's a little bit more customer service oriented. It's a little bit more consultative. But if you continue that selling persona through the closing, it doesn't add up. It's not good enough to get it done, and you can eventually, but it takes longer, more effort, or sometimes doesn't happen at all. And people scratch their head like, oh, why didn't it close? And it's not matching up to the situation. And again, I want to underscore, I'm not talking about being brash or being rough or ruffling feathers or I'm not talking about being like this closer. I'm just saying that there's a bit of a difference in terms of the personas, and if you recognize the difference and you're able to separate and you're able to understand you shifting at the stage where it needs to shift, you're like, okay, and understanding, acknowledging that the selling persona is done, and now I'm going to switch gears into the closing persona and move to make that happen. Just that little shift in viewpoint can look into good, asking the right questions, boxing it in, controlling, framing the conversation. I know control gets a bad rap, but it's actually it's very necessary when it comes to closing. Guiding, navigating, handling, clarifying, identifying, like wrapping up, handling, tinkering. It's like a negotiation, right? It's like at the very end of negotiation, and if you don't have that part down, if you don't have the closing persona down, it creates havoc on your sales deals. And you're scratching your head like, what happened? We had such a nice call back here and everything was so good. Why aren't they signing? Why isn't it? And it's like, you're not sort of meeting up to sort of the environment in terms of what's needed. It's almost like the wrong personality for the task, right? Right personality for selling, wrong personality for closing.
Yeah.
Okay. So, think with that a little bit, and just, you don't have to take it from me. Just kind of look at yourself and be like, what are those two personas, and how can I separate them out, and make a little note and look at like where in your own sales cycle does it enter in, and where do you need to shift gears, and then start looking at the deals that you're trying to close right now, and which ones are identify, which one's still in selling, which one's crossing over into closing, and where do I need to like take on that persona and start doing those things where it's like asking the right questions and all that kind of stuff. By the way, if you have any questions on any of the stuff we cover, like leave them in the comments, or fire off an email at info@richter10.2.com or something like that, or go to our website and fill in the form, and we're happy to answer these things, so go ahead and do that. But anyway, hopefully you understand, hopefully that helps, and again, fire off any questions if you have. Okay, thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the show right there, and hit the old like button and share it on social. Okay, thanks.
You got something? No? Not yet. All right.
Here we go.
All right.
Okay. On this episode.
Okay, take two.
Break.